Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. Let's go on. The power of language is formidable. In Chinese class, for example, a child solves a problem in class. If the teacher says it's correct, the child may be very happy. But if the teacher says it's wrong, the child may be very frustrated. It's all the teacher's words, yet the child's reactions can be completely different. The key point that leads to these different reactions lies in the judgment of right or wrong. Under the same circumstances, if the teacher doesn't make a judgment, but the last ranked student who always gets zero in exams says the child is right, the child may still be frustrated. Why? Although the content said is right, does the child's reaction differ so much? Because when the G waves of right are input twice, the environments in which the corresponding G are activated are different. When the teacher says it's correct, the teacher's image as a key characteristic internal structure of the sensory G wave is input into the child's brain. Then, when this characteristic internal structure is projected, it will activate the corresponding teacher G, which is formed through the child's life experiences and has G connections with G related to right and wrong, honor and disgrace, teaching, etc. However, since there is resistance to the activation of G through G connections, and there are numerous G connections with the teacher G, which series of pathways will be activated? It depends on what other characteristic internal structures are contained in the input sensory G wave. When the teacher says it's right or wrong, obviously, two different types of pathways are activated, as indicated by the child's different reactions. Similarly, when the last ranked student said the child's answer is correct, the child's cognitive G of the last ranked student is activated, and the G connections related to this cognitive G may also be activated. The environment in which these G are activated will affect the child's reaction. Essentially, different G and G connection pathways are activated. Whether it's the teacher's evaluation or the last ranked student's evaluation, we have simplified the sensory input G wave into two parts: the content of what is said and who says it. In reality, it's far more complex. For example, to whom they are speaking, in what environment, at what volume, and with what tone, etc. These are also present as characteristic internal structures in the child's sensory input G wave. Here, we can mention the characteristic internal structure of tone. Many times, the difference between normal speech and accusation lies only in the intensity of the auditory input G wave. That is, differences in amplitude or frequency. But this difference in amplitude or frequency after being projected can activate a person's emotional G or honor and disgrace Ju, causing completely different emotions. Thus, we can roughly grasp the characteristic internal structure of Tang, and at the same time, we will have a deeper understanding of the extensiveness of characteristic in internal structures. Characteristic internal structures similar to Tang include music. Music is composed of notes, but the number of notes and the high and low pitches are limited, and the time intervals between notes in a piece are fixed. This makes the music produced by strictly following the original score of a piece fixed. However, if a performer has a strong emotion while performing, the characteristic internal structure of his emotional G wave will combine this will combine with the motor G wave of his performance, which may be reflected in the performance as changes in the high and low pitches and intervals of the notes. That is, there is certain degree of dispersion compared to the original piece. This dispersion reflects the performer's mood and is the external manif- manifestation of the performer's emotional characteristic internal structure. When an audience with the same mood hears this performance, they may have a strong resonance. What is this resonance? It is the strong activation of a certain G by G waves with the similar characteristic internal structures of the sensory input. This activation is often stronger than the activation of a G by a pseudo-reality G wave. After that, we can understand that seemingly identical sensory G wave inputs can lead to completely different reactions. This direct reason is the different environments in which the G are activated. These differences can be caused not only by differences in the sensory G waves, but also by pre-existing differences in the G environment within the analyzed subject. For example, if you cheekily asked the same body in the same town, bro, let's go have shrimp. If this body is hungry or has just had a big meal, his reaction will be completely different. Additionally, we can deduce how to operate to make the other party have the reaction we want. In the treatment of patients, we need to pay attention to our position in the patient's heart, whether we are trusted or suspected, relied on or rejected, respected or despised. We also need to pay attention to the communication environment as well as our choice of words and tone. In particular, words and tone are two extremely important characteristic internal structures. Of course, we must first analyze the activity patterns of the patient's brain G environment and the state of G activation in the patient's brain during the current communication. Many excellent psychologists actually use these methods in practice. Moreover, it is important to emphasize that when communicating with patients, sincerity is indispensable unless you adopt some extreme measures. Alright, guys, that's all the content today. See you next time. Bye bye.